Committee and that of the committee chaired by Mr. Miller, California?
No, I'm afraid I cannot. I was not here at the time.
Can you tell us why the employees were fired?
No, I cannot. Again, I don't know. I was not here at that time.
Can you help us with that, Mr. Howitt?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm familiar with the circumstances surrounding separation of those employees with Alyeska.
Why were each of the employees discharged?
First of all, I think as the first panel discussed accurately, not all of them were discharged. Several of them were. Glenn Plumley discussed that due to a change in the manner in which we contracted for inspectors, we offered him a different job in Anchorage. He elected to not accept that job. His old job was no longer available, and he elected to terminate employment. Technically, he's correct that since he elected not to take the new job, he was fired.
He was a whistleblower, was he not?
At the time, I did not believe he was a whistleblower. And,
Clearly he's a whistleblower
excuse
now.
me, I believe also that the initial determination of the Department of Labor also agreed with that.
All right, let's go to the next.
Jim Schooley was also an Alyeska employee. Circumstances are that he was what we called a special services employee of Alyeska, which is our shorthand for a temporary employee. His employment period was anticipated to last up to 2 years. He was terminated at 18 months due to his services no longer being required in the quality program. That was the reason we had temporary employees, so that we could vary the workforce as those requirements dictated. The remainder of the first panel were all contract employees. We employ quality people or quality services people for a number of reasons, but through contract employees, but normally because the activities are seasonal in nature. All of those people, as they accurately reported, resigned their positions. They were not terminated. Dick Green was a contractor employee as the manager of QC at the terminal. He was terminated as a result of a reorganization at the terminal, as he mentioned. I do not agree with him that it was a bogus or a sham reorganization. In fact, it was a very well thought out reorganization. And another gentleman whose qualifications are very good and was already working at the terminal was put in that position.
Right. Now, Mr. Howitt, you were part of a quality control meeting or a telephone conversation on March 18, 1992. This discussion involved Steve Newcomer, Richard Carter, Fred Hayes, Chuck Biddy, who sits next to you at the table, Austin Elliott, Richard Green, Robert Richardson, Jim Whitaker, Richard Rome, Dale Centofanti, Carlos Barvia, Jerry Stalkup, Larry Kaufman, and George Stewart. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I don't recall such a meeting. Perhaps if you gave me the subject to that meeting, or maybe I could recall in the context of a question.
You don't remember the meeting at all?
March 18th, 1992. I'm sorry, I don't recall it, but I may recall it if something could be given to refresh my memory.
Well, you were there, were you not, Mr. Biddy?
Yes, I was.
Well, now, Mr. Biddy, I'm sorry, and Mr. Howitt, didn't you, Mr. Howitt, in that meeting say Alyeska, for various reasons, is involved as a pawn in a slugfest between two major players in the Congress? These two players are Congressman Miller and Congressman Dingell, and there are two committees, and the oversight those two committees have over the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and energy resources in Alaska. Did you say that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't recall saying that. I realize that both committees are involved in investigations of Alyeska. I was involved in both of those. I don't recall saying those specific words, no.
Well, By an interesting coincidence, without any action on the part of this committee, and I want to make that very clear, the committee has received a rather complete report on this. And let me read what you were supposed to have said at that time. The importance of this is this. Alyeska, for various reasons, is involved in a pawn in a slugfest between two major players in Congress. These two players are Congressman Miller and Congressman Dingell. And there are two committees, and the oversight these two committees have over the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and the energy resources in Alaska. We've got a major slugfest going on in Dingell's committee. Dingell's committee was the committee, and Miller's committee is making inroads into that, and that is one of his professed goals. Dingell's committee was one that oversaw the original Weld audit in 1976 and 1977. If Dingell finds that the wool, that in any way the wool was pulled over his eyes during the audit, he's going to be plenty mad, and that's going to raise the stakes a lot. But my goal, and if any of you know any more of this than what I've said, enlighten me more. I don't think I want to go into that in this room. But if any of you can enlighten me more after this meeting and straighten it out, I'd like to know, because my goal is to be able to get the absolute truth regarding that so that there are no surprises. And we can go to Congressman Dingell's committee and say this is exactly what happened. Do you remember that?
I remember having a number of meetings with various personnel from the various locations in the quality program.
Well, the purpose of this meeting was to apparently discuss the hearing at which we sit today.
Yes, if I can complete my answer. At all of those meetings, this was shortly after the whistleblower allegations first came in, I was looking into those, as I believe you would expect me to do. And my goal was getting the absolute truth. And at those meetings, I explained the context under which I was trying to get that information. And that was for at any time that I was called before an investigation or was called to speak to any member of Congress or an investigative staff or our owners, that I wanted to know what the truth was so that, one, I could portray that correctly, and two, that I could do something about it. Well, sir, I don't think I said those exact words. Slugfest, for instance, isn't in my normal vocabulary, but I did ask people for the information. I did explain the context, and I did say I wanted the truth.
So this is beginning to refresh your place?
In the first floor conference room of the Alliance Bank building in Anchorage, but we were on a telephone hookup to the Valdez inspection staff.
Okay.
Yeah. Now,
excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
I
now remember that meeting. The way it was originally described as a conference call, I did not remember that.
Meeting.
What's that?
I said a conference call or meeting, and I'll take it either way.
Yes, and I do recall the meeting, now that Mr. Biddy talks about it, in the Alliance Bank building. I can't remember that particular day, but I do remember the meeting.
I understand. What else was discussed at this meeting?
Excuse me, are you addressing me or Mr. Biddy?
And then we'll get Mr. Biddy to perhaps refresh us both on it. Go ahead.
As I recall, I called the meeting to, if this is the meeting that I'm remembering, to discuss the allegations of Glenn Plumley that had come to my attention. I can't recall at that point in time if additional allegations had come in from Jim Schooley or the others. I wanted to let them know what my best knowledge of those allegations were, what I was doing about it, what I was telling other people about it. In other words, what I was telling press inquiries and what I was telling the owners. And I also asked them if they knew anything that I was saying which was untrue or needed additional amplification to be completely correct, that I wanted to know about it, and I'd follow it up.
Now, Mr. Pritchard, you've been sitting here during this discussion. Do you regard yourself as a pawn in a trivial turf battle between two congressmen, my good friend Mr. Miller and myself?
I'm sorry, could you ask the question again?
Well, let me try and do this again. You've sat here and listened to the testimony this morning of the earlier panels, and you've listened to the testimony here this afternoon. Do you regard yourself as a pawn in a trivial turf battle between two congressmen, myself and my good friend from California, Mr. Miller, or that Alyeska is simply a pawn in a piddling turf battle between two committee chairmen?
I take your committee's work and Chairman Miller's committee's work extremely seriously.
Well, we give every evidence of being in close harmony and cooperation, for what I can see. Or should we characterize this as just a turf battle, or should we say there are serious problems here?
Don't know.
Beg pardon?
I don't know. It's improper for me to comment on the relationship between your committees.
How about commenting on how you feel? You're sitting there. You think you're in the middle of a turf battle, or that you've got some serious problems on your hands?
I take both committees equally seriously.
Well, the interesting thing is that maybe my friend from California finds a turf battle going on here, but I do not. But I'm curious. Let's dispense with that part of the question. But do you find that maybe there's a few serious problems in Alyeska?
Yes, and I have said so.
Well, very well. Time of the chair has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pritchard, you sat in the front row and listened to the You sat in the front row and listened to the four witnesses and their counsel, their representatives this morning discuss lots of different things. Do you believe those employees coming to this subcommittee, do you think that's served a useful purpose for the subcommittee and helping to point out some problems at Alyeska?
I think the attention that the subcommittee has brought to bear on these matters has served a useful purpose in that it's reminded us of the importance of getting in compliance with codes, in doing things safely, and in operating as we want to operate. Yes, it has served a useful purpose in that regard.
Why did you, Mr. Pritchard, why did Alyeska file a claim against Mr. Hamill to prevent him from receiving information and thereby assisting this subcommittee in bringing to the surface these problems and other problems?
We filed a counterclaim asserting that any documents of ours that he might have belong to us and we want them back and we don't want any more further documents going that way. And I did not feel that this was an unusual or an unreasonable claim. This is a practice that is taken for granted by every business in the United States, most businesses in the world. We are not trying to inhibit people's right and duty to go and report environmental or safety irregularities. That right and duty is there. It should be preferred. We just don't want people taking our property to exercise those rights.
But you personally approve that action, correct, Mr. Pritchard?
Yes, I did.
Okay. With the history of this subcommittee's relationship with Alyeska, with the history of the problems that you have, with the history of people being terminated, or as Mr. Howitt said, separated, I think is the term he used, with the history of all of the safety problems, isn't this just another example of stifling the flow of information regarding the whole pipeline questions?
I don't think it is, and I repeat that we are not trying to stifle people talking to agencies, talking to members of Congress, talking to private individuals. We just want to keep control of our documents which belong to us just like any other normal business would. We are not trying to stifle people's rights.
Recognize the concerns that the four gentlemen and the other two brought forward this morning. What specific measures do you plan to undertake to fix these problems?
There are several, and they're recorded in the written testimony. The problems that we, first of all, the physical problems. The physical problems, like the code violations, we've already started to fix them. This is a fast-moving target, but as of last Friday, we'd already fixed 31 of the 100 or so code violations in one of the junction boxes in Valdez, and we're continuing to work on fixing the physical problems that have been identified. The problems which are undermining the effectiveness of the quality assurance and quality compliance programs are less tangible and more elusive, because they have to do with things like trust and management style and simplification of bureaucracy. The sorts of specific measures that we're taking, we have engaged Booz Allen, the national consulting firm, that is going to do a series of process reviews, going to look at our major business processes, and I'm not sure what they will be, but they will be things like maintenance and pipeline operations, terminal operations, things like that, and find out how we need to do our business and still make sure that we do it safely, that we comply with a quality program, and that we comply with the environmental laws. So that work's going to be going on. We're starting very shortly. It will probably take 3 or 4 months to do that, and then we will implement whatever recommendations the consultant makes. Another thing we're doing starting in September, I wish we could do it earlier, but we can't get hold of these guys before then, is I'm bringing the DuPont safety training program into Alyeska. I'm DuPont trained myself. It is a very, very effective safety training program, because what it teaches you is that safety is good business. Safety is not an added cost. Safety is good business. That not being safe is bad business. So we're going to bring that training in.
Do you plan to bring the manual, if I could interrupt for a moment, Mr. Pritchard, do you plan to bring the manual back that was sort of buried in the library? It was implied. Do you plan to bring that back and use that for your inspectors?
Yes, that manual, the quality program has a series of manuals. The quality program is currently being revised. It's being revised to make it more responsive, to make the duties of inspectors and the different participants more definitive and more explicit, to say who's accountable for what. But just having the manual, the procedures, and the paperwork by itself won't be enough. We have to successfully implement the paperwork.
I'm new on the subcommittee, but I have, talking to subcommittee staff and talking to the chairman, it's pretty clear that they've heard a lot of this before. Do you have any plans to conduct an independent oversight of the programmatic problems of Alyeska?
To the extent that the retaining Booz Allen to take a look at our business processes, I'm hoping that that will uncover that kind of thing.
Will Booz Allen look at the relation? There's some concern from the chairman's initial questions to you, Mr. Pritchard. There's some concern about the ownership and the changing of your original testimony and your sort of ad-libbing from some testimony that was written by you prior to, and the input of particularly the 3 largest investors, the 3 largest owners of Alyeska. Will Booz Allen look at the relationship between Alyeska and, on the one hand, and BP, ARCO, and Exxon on the other?
No, this will be an internal look, and I'll repeat what I said earlier. The owners are completely supportive of the expression that I made earlier to fix these problems. The owners want these problems fixed too. They have told me that.
What's the problem with the owners looking at the relationship? Booz Allen looking at the relationship between the company and the owners that way.
I'm not sure what that would uncover. I mean, the relationship between the owners is contractual. There was a contract that was set up at the beginning, and that contract is there. I'm not sure that having a management consulting firm would help.
It seems the underlying, again, I have not sat in these hearings before, but it seems the underlying problem here, Mr. Pritchard, is there's some inference that the owners are using Alyeska as sort of a cash cow, which they don't really need to put much money into to continue the money, pardon the pun, but the play on words, but continue the kind of the flow of money through the pipeline to them. Doesn't that kind of suggest that Booz Allen might want to look at that relationship?
Well, first of all, that has not been my experience. In my admittedly limited dealings with the owners, I have not found them to be anything but supportive of safety, environmental protection, and compliance.
So why all these problems in the last half dozen years, or dozen plus years then?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
So then, if you can't answer that, and I understand you can't because you're new, wouldn't it help you if Booz Allen would look at that kind of relationship, not just today on what those three large companies, the three large investors in Alyeska and in the relationship with you, but the sort of the history of their relationship with you, meaning you, the company Alyeska. Wouldn't that shine some light on some situations that might help you administer that company better and know how to operate that better and deal with the safety problems that have been alleged?
If the owners wish to do that, it would be their decision. I mean,
You don't seem to be pushing the owners to do that.
No, I would not be pushing the owners to do that
owners
because I don't believe that would solve the problem.
If the owners are supporting you, as you say they are, because you're in this together, and the owners are as committed to this as you tell us you are, and I don't doubt your sincerity about that. Why can't? Would you be willing to suggest to the owners that relationship be studied, be investigated, be analyzed by Booz Allen?
Only if I thought it would be helpful, and
Do you think it would be?
No, I really don't think it would be helpful.
We better adjourn. 15 minutes. Yeah, yeah. Okay, the committee, unfortunately, will recess for about 12 to 15 minutes, or as fast as I can walk over there and come back. So the committee is recessed for about 12 to 15 minutes. Subcommittee will again come to order. Yeah, I'll stop there. Mr. Pritchard, early this morning, a number of witnesses testified they were placed on blacklists at Alyeska for reporting serious environmental and safety concerns. Do you know if the company has ever maintained a blacklist on employees?
Are you talking currently?
Do you know currently, today, if the company has ever maintained a blacklist on employees?
As far as I know, the company currently does not have a blacklist of the type
that wasn't quite my question.
Yeah.
Do you have personal knowledge if the company has ever maintained a blacklist on employees?
I think you would expect us to keep a list of people who are not eligible for employment for various safety reasons, like alcohol, drugs, fraud, and things like that. And compiling such a list, there's some legal sensitivity.
You didn't hear me.
No, I'm just trying to say that I think it would be proper for us to keep a list of that nature.
Of that nature?
Yes.
The nature you just described, but not the nature that my question described. My question was, do you have any knowledge of if Alyeska's ever maintained a blacklist on employees of those reporting serious environmental and safety concerns?
Currently, no.
Currently, they don't keep a list. You've made that clear. Do you know if the company, you're either not listening or you don't want to listen. Do you know if the company has ever maintained a blacklist on employees, a blacklist on those employees who have reported serious environmental or safety concerns? Do you have personal knowledge of that?
As far as I know, that has not happened, but I cannot. The reason I'm not answering positively, it's not because I'm not hearing or don't want to hear. It's because I don't know what's happened in history.
That's a legitimate answer. I'll ask Mr. Howitt the same question in a moment, but it's disturbing, and Chairman Miller and I were talking about this on the way over to vote, that this company has a history of bringing new people in who don't have institutional memories, no fault of your own, but have no institutional memories of what happened before, and then it happens again. Mr. Howitt, same question. Do you know of if the company has ever maintained a blacklist on employees who have reported serious environmental and safety concerns?
I can say definitively that the company, as a corporate entity, has not, to my knowledge, ever maintained a blacklist. However, I am familiar with the list which was discussed this morning by Glenn Plumley that was assembled by Danny Keck. And I can describe that to you if you'd like.
Mr. Biddy, what do you think about that?
Does he know?
What do you know about blacklists, and if the company has, or if this single individual has, or what do you know?
Yes, sir. In 1991, when I was pulled into Anchorage from Valdez, Dan Keck, the Alyeska Level 3, showed me a copy of a blacklist. It was several pages long. He told me that these people were not eligible for rehire. He told me that it was developed by Alyeska Security and Ron Wolk, the Quality Assurance Manager. Later, when we were moved to another building, that same list was on Glenn Plumley's computer, and he told Richard Carter that he wanted that removed from his computer. That information was transferred to a floppy disk and given to the quality control supervisor, John Murphy. I don't know what happened to it after that. But in the next year, 1992, in March, I maintained the manpower board, and I had several people under the available for reassignment slot. And Mr. Carter, the quality control manager, told me that there was an error with my board and to take those names down. And I told him that I'll leave them there in case the work gets heavy and we have to call them back. He said, take them down. They're never coming back.
Why not?
That
Did he say why not?
No, he didn't elaborate. But
Why do you think why not?
Well, I turned to my supervisor, John Murphy, who was standing there, and Gene Nunn, another inspector, and I asked Murphy when Mr. Carter walked away, were they blacklisted? And he said, you can call it what you want, they're not coming back.
Now that list included, that list of those blacklisted that quote unquote weren't coming back, at least some of those were for safety and environmental concern issues?
Bob Plumley, Glenn Plumley, Jim Schooley, Joe Takana, and Ken Hasten. Those were the 5 names that he told me to take down.
Because they reported safety and environmental concern.
He didn't say why.
What do you think?
My personal opinion is because they were reporting safety and environmental concerns.
Yes. Mr. Howitt, you had said Mr. Biddy said Dan Kick had done this. You had said the corporation, you are virtually certain the corporation didn't ever order a blacklist or maintain a blacklist. Now, Dan Kick, was he operating independent of Alyeska? Was it not the company that was doing that? Is he some independent player that doesn't listen to higher ups and you had no knowledge of his doing this?
He actually created the list from conversations he had regarding clearing people for badging with Ron Walk and the security people. Ron Walk had cautioned him not to create a list because these people who he was clearing were people who had been implicated in an investigation regarding allegations surrounding our NDE contractor, Thorpe Technical Services. Each one of these people had had allegations brought forth that they had either falsified time cards, were involved in drug or alcohol use on Alyeska property. The procedure that Dan Keck was using for dispatching NDE technicians as opposed to inspectors, but that means non-destructive examination personnel, was to call Ron, who was in charge of the QA side of the investigation, and Ron would clear with security each person which our contractor was nominating for employment, and to determine whether their name was one of those that was implicated or was not. That list was an ongoing, or Ron's investigation was an ongoing investigation, and names were being cleared virtually every day from those allegations as the investigation went on. That is the reason that Ron cautioned Dan not to put together a list, because any list that we're talking about today were on Dan Keck's list.
None of them were?
None
You
of them.
say?
To my
You claim-
knowledge, none of
Mr.
them
Biddy,
were.
you say they were, those four gentlemen.
No, sir, I didn't say that they were. That on that list, I was talking about the conversation that I had with Richard Carter, where he said to remove them from the board, that they were no longer eligible for rehire.
Are there two blacklists?
I have heard that there are several blacklists.
Now, Mr. Howard, on the this Dan Keck gentleman, where's he today? Is he still in the company?
No, he is employed in Saudi Arabia, I believe, still.
With whom?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
He was not at Alyeska?
At the time that I'm referring to, Mr. Keck was employed by Alyeska.
Yeah.
He was employed as a level 3 NDE.
Mr. Pritchard, how do you react to all this? Is a lot of this new to you? These blacklists, maybe more than one blacklist, maybe a drug and alcohol blacklist over here, and an environmental blacklist over here, and maybe a safety blacklist over there. What do you think of all this?
I think it ties in with what I said earlier, that that it is very difficult in an organization like this to communicate expectations and to check on expectations. That's the challenge. We need to get it known that these kind of lists are unacceptable, that we will keep a list for safety and drug-related and fraud and that kind of thing, but we need to be explicit about what it takes to get on there, what it takes to get off there. We need to have one person accountable for keeping that list. I do not condone these secret lists. That is unacceptable.
Is Alyeska bringing in Mr. Pritchard going to do the job when you have the kind of managers that run amok, the kind of managers that go off independently and in a hierarchical structure and put together blacklists for problem A, problem B, problem C, problem D? Isn't the problem more serious than bringing in a manager with a reputation such as yours for, toughness and directness and all that? Is that going to do the job, or do you need to kind of clean house a little bit more here?
What makes me feel that this challenge is achievable is, as I said earlier, we have some very good people in the organization. We do have some very good people.
My time has expired. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Bryan.
Thank you. Mr. Biddy, have you ever been threatened for forwarding negative or critical reports about Alyeska?
Yes, sir.
Would you tell us when and by who?
The terminal manager at the Valdez Marine Terminal told me that if I gave him another discrepancy report, he'd break my goddamn arm.
What's his name?
Rod Pugh.
Okay. Mr. Howard, did you know about that?
I've discussed that.
Just answer my question. Did you know about that?
Yes, I've discussed that incident with Mr. Biddy on several occasions. Is Mr. Pugh still working for your company? Excuse me.
Is Mr. Pugh still working for your company?
Yes, he is.
And did you confront him with this obvious improper behavior?
Yes, we did.
And what was his response?
He said he didn't recall saying something like that particularly.
Did he deny it?
I wouldn't characterize his conversation as outright denial.
What do you think happened?
My personal opinion is that Rod may have said that, and I'll tell you why. Rod worked for me for a number of years. I was his manager. Rod's kind of an emotional guy. He said the same thing to me a couple of times.
Is that right? And he's still working for the company?
I knew what context he was saying it in.
What context could that be? If he told Mr. Biddy that if he filed another discrepancy report, he was going to break his blankety-blank arm, that's clearly not proper. And if he told you the same thing, why is he still working for you?
Mr. Congressman, I am not condoning what Rod Pugh said to Mr. Biddy. I think that was entirely improper.
Let me ask you a question. Have you been put in charge of human relations there at the company?
Yes, sir, I have.
And this man's still working there. And he threatened you and he threatened Mr. Biddy.
He threatened me in the context that we were friends and we knew it. But what I'm saying is...
Now, what's that mean? He
I know what his vocabulary.
his vocabulary is that he threatened you for filing a discrepancy report?
No, excuse me. He didn't threaten me for filing a discrepancy report. He said to me one time that he'd break my arm if I ever did something like that again. And it was in the context of being friends, not, and I'm sure that all of you here have had a similar conversation with a friend who says something like that.
I have not had a similar conversation with any friend. I don't have any friends that have threatened to break my arm. And I don't think that that you do either, Mr. Howitt. I think that you apparently condone the threat that he made to Mr. Biddy, that if he filed any more discrepancy reports, he was going to face some dire consequences, or you would have fired him already.
Excuse me, Mr. Congressman. I already stated that I did not condone in any way
why does he still work there? Why does he still work there?
Because the context he said that to me was one between two friends, and it was not in a work situation.
But you know that he said it to Mr. Biddy, and he didn't deny that he said it to Mr. Biddy, but he's still working for the company.
And he said, and when I had Rod Pugh asked, and several people asked Rod Pugh if he actually said that, there was no convincing evidence that he actually said it.
Mr. Pritchard, do you know Mr. Pugh?
I've met him.
And do you know about this threat that he made to Mr. Biddy?
Again, I've heard the allegations.
All right, and what do you think of the allegation?
I don't know. There's two sides to every story. If my understanding's correct, he's no longer in the kind of assignment where he has to deal with inspectors.
Is that right? Why is that?
I don't know. Perhaps Mr. Howitt can comment on why that move was made.
No. I want to talk to the boss of the company. This man is credibly alleged and did not deny threatening Mr. Biddy for filing discrepancy reports and threatening physical violence against him. Mr. Howitt acknowledges that he has threatened him in the past for I don't know exactly what, and yet he's still in the company.
That's correct.
And that's with your approval.
Yes.
Well, that's certainly a contradiction to the lengthy statement which you and your censors at the three companies that seem to run this company you work for prepared and sent to us.
Yeah, I'll look into it.
You'll look into what?
What you just said.
Maybe we better be sure that you know what I just said. What did I just say?
I think you were suggesting that this kind of behavior should be looked into and dealt with appropriately.
What I'm raising a question about is the sincerity of the statement that you've made here today about the future of Alyeska.
Yes.
If you know that this individual has behaved in this fashion and you've not discharged him, that's what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Mr. Biddy, has your salary been cut by $45,000?
Yes, sir, it has.
And who ordered that cut?
As far as I know, Richard Carter. It was approved by upper management.
Who is he?
Richard Carter was the Quality Services Department manager at one time.
Okay. Why was your salary cut?
I was pulled out of Valdez, my job assignment in Valdez, and transferred to Anchorage. I had just purchased a home after having a lease purchase agreement for 18 months, and I asked if I was going to be there, and I was assured by management that I would. We closed on the home in October, and 3 months later, I was pulled out of Valdez.
And who ordered that?
Richard Carter.
Okay. Why did he do that?
I think, in my opinion, because I had identified so many problems at the Valdez terminal.
Okay.
Then I was told that they would not buy my home in Valdez, so I had an $1,800 a month house note in Valdez, and I was living in Anchorage. And my wife and daughter was in Valdez. Now, later, I was told that they would buy my home if I would take a promotion and a $45,000 cut in pay. And the other side of it was if I didn't, I would be terminated and I would still have that home.
Now, is that more of this terminology and context that seems to be unique to Alyeska, that you talk about a promotion and a $45,000 cut in pay?
Yes, sir.
Maybe you could put that in context for us, Mr. Howitt.
Mr. Biddy's position in Valdez, as a lot of field positions, including one that I've held, entails isolation differentials, entails unscheduled overtime as well as scheduled overtime. And so positions in the field are compensated according to the amount of work that they have to do that is above and beyond normal 40-hour work. And Mr. Biddy received compensation for that. Normally, when we bring people in from the field for short assignments, we continue to compensate them in that same fashion on temporary assignments so that they do not lose money unnecessarily. In the particular case of Mr. Biddy, he was one of 5 inspectors that when we made the decision to have all of our inspection done by contractor inspectors, he was one of the inspectors that was offered a position of quality control coordinator, which was a normal 40-hour-a-week job, exempt job in Anchorage. That job did not entail field assignment. It did not entail unscheduled overtime or scheduled overtime, and so the consequent loss in overall take-home pay.
Do you believe that, Mr. Biddy?
No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Pritchard, what do you know about this matter?
As much as you do, just what I've heard right here.
You never heard this story before?
Yeah, I've heard this story before. That
You never asked about it before?
yeah, and what I know about it is that Mr. Biddy was working in Valdez, and the decision was made to move the contract, to move the inspector workforce in Valdez to a contract workforce.
I see. So you don't think there's any connection between the fact that he was turning in discrepancy reports and he got threatened with his arm being broken, or he got moved right after he bought a house, or he got his pay cut by $45,000? You don't think there's any connection?
No, I really don't. I sincerely don't in that case. I think that was a consequence of a decision that was taken to turn the inspector workforce in Valdez into a contract workforce.
Do you think the 4 people that were here earlier today were lying? The 4 employees, former employees of Alyeska, the inspectors, do you think they were lying?
I'm sure they weren't lying. I'm sure they were under oath. I'm sure they were not.
Well, do you accept the statements that they've made about the problems at Alyeska?
Yes, I accept the statements about the problems.
And you accept the statements that they made about the way in which they were treated?
Yes.
What action have you taken to fix that?
Well, the witnesses in the earlier panel, it's my understanding that the lawsuits that they filed against Alyeska have all been settled. Some of the witnesses said that they'd settled, some of them didn't, but it's my understanding that all those cases have been settled.
Okay. Let me ask you, Mr. Pritchard, when you came to work for this business, no doubt you were curious about a variety of the charges that had been made. Alyeska hired Wackenut to find out who was leaking documents to a Mr. Charles Hamill, and to put a stop to it, documents that contain revelations about exactly the same type of wrongdoing we heard about this morning. Did you ask who authorized Wackenut to do that?
No, I did not.
You showed no curiosity about that matter whatsoever?
I showed no curiosity. That case was in litigation and still is in litigation, and I showed no curiosity. I just wanted to make sure that that kind of thing wouldn't happen again.
Now, that's curious because obviously managing a serious threat to the financial stability of the company in the form of a lawsuit would be part of your job. How could you not ask any questions about that?
Why should I ask a question? The whole issue was in litigation.
To find out if you have anybody who's still working for you that is prone to that kind of behavior. You didn't try to root out the cause of that problem?
Again, I'm going to wait and see what happens as this moves through the litigation.
That answer is totally uncredible. Mr. Howitt, who authorized Wackenhut to carry out that activity?
I was not involved in the Wackenhut investigation or the Wackenhut at all.
I didn't ask you if you were
whatsoever,
involved.
and I don't know.
You don't know. Have you ever asked?
I have never asked that definitive question, no, sir.
Don't use the word definitive with me. Have you ever asked anybody who authorized the Wackenhut investigation?
I don't think I've ever asked that specific question, sir, no.
Have you ever heard the answer to the question?
I believe that I heard that Jim Hermiller, the president and CEO, authorized that.
That's Mr. Pritchard's former boss, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
No,
now,
that's
I'm
not
sorry,
correct.
Excuse me, that's not
predecessor,
correct.
excuse me.
Yeah.
Now, it is the case, is it not, that in order to gain Hamill's confidence, this individual to whom the whistleblowers were sending information, you all set up a phony environmental concern group called Ecolite. You've heard about that, haven't you? ECOLIT. Have you heard about that, Mr. Howitt?
I've read about it.
Only read about it. Mr. Pritchard, have you heard about it?
I've read about it in the newspaper.
Okay. And in order to try to discover the names of the people at Alyeska that were giving information to Hamill, you went so far as to have your law firm prepare a phony legal complaint against oil companies. That is to say, a law firm which was supposed to be working for Ecolite prepare a phony claim against oil companies. You know what I'm talking about?
Again, I've read about it in the newspaper.
Mr. Howitt, you know what I'm talking about?
Only what I've read about in the newspaper. I know nothing about that investigation.
Okay, who did that? Did Mr. Hermiller do that? The former chairman and CEO of Alyeska?
Are you referring to forming the company?
Forming the company and then and having a lawyer for, which apparently was for this group, file a lawsuit against oil companies in order to make Mr. Hamill think that they were on his side, and therefore he would give them the sources that he had, which you wanted to know about.
Congressman, I have no knowledge of that whatsoever.
Okay, good. In your testimony, you stated that I'm going to quote to you, my predecessor made significant strides opening up communication within the organization. Mr. Pritchard,
yes.
What's your understanding as to why your predecessor was removed, and on what basis do you conclude that he was in fact opening up communication?
Let me answer the second part of the question first. During his tenure, he did a number of things. He encouraged employees to send him, to get in touch with him directly if they had concerns or complaints. He started a series of functions called employee conferences, where we get a whole cross-section of employees into Anchorage to meet with management, and he took a number of initiatives like that.
Such as having Wackenhut apparently wiretap some people, move a van up in front of Mr. Hamill's house, if I'm not mistaken.
Sir, I have no knowledge of that. I'm talking about internal communications within the organization. That was a well-intentioned attempt to do that, and I believe it was very helpful.
All right. One last question. Mr. Biddy, did you ever hear Alyeska management discussing Chuck Hamill?
Not that I can recall right now.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up very briefly on my friend from Texas questions for Mr. Howitt, has any disciplinary action ever been taken against Mr. Pugh for threatening Mr. Biddy, especially in the context of Mr. Biddy's making discrepancy reports?
To the best of my knowledge, Mr. Pugh was removed from the job that he was holding at the time and moved into a job of supervising the support services at the terminal.
Was that a promotion?
No, sir, it was not.
So that would be in the disciplinary action. Mr. Pritchard, you stated in response to questions from Mr. Brown that you believe that no purpose would be served by having Booz Allen examine the relationship between Alyeska and the owners because the owners are supportive. Isn't the relationship between Alyeska and the owners crucial to the way that Alyeska does business?
If you look at the owners like a board of directors, and every company has owners representing the people who own the company, and that's the context in which the owners, I believe, would like to operate. They would like to operate to where they give us policy guidance, to where they give us general direction, and to where they approve budgets and so on, because they're the source of our funding.
They set the goals, right?
I'm sorry?
They set goals?
Yes, they set goals, or they approve the goals that we recommend.
Do the owners tell Alyeska whether and to what extent Alyeska is meeting these goals?
We have to report to them periodically and tell them how we're doing, yes.
Mm-hmm. You get feedback. And you get feedback from this reports from the owners?
That's correct.
Don't the owners provide Alyeska with money?
Yes, they do. They are the only source of money that we got.
Right. Didn't the owners select you as Alyeska's new president?
Yes, they did.
Yes, they did. Is there a constant, we might call, influx of personnel from the ownership companies into and out of Alyeska?
At the moment, we have something between 20 and 30 employees from the owner companies in Alyeska.
In light of the pervasive influence of the owners on Alyeska, can any meaningful management review really be done without considering the relationship between Alyeska and the owners?
I believe it can internally, because I really believe they want us to do the same things that you want us to do. They want us to operate safely. They want us to operate in compliance. They want us to be in code. I don't believe there's a conflict.
How willing are they to spend money?
Ultimately,
It's false economy.
it end up costing you more in the long run.
That's right. It is much cheaper to do something right the first time than it is to repair it when you discover it's defective.
Will you recommend to the owners that Booz Allen's study be expanded to include the relationship between Alyeska and its owners?
No, I won't. As I replied to Congressman Brown, I just do not believe that would be helpful.
One final couple questions. You were here probably when we had the previous panel, and we were talking about the regulators, state and federal. You heard the answers that we got from these individuals, and most of them had, I think all of them had been with the company better than a year and a half, and virtually had not seen state or federal regulators. Would you agree to this? Or Mr. Howitt, or Mr. Biddy, anyone? Mr. Biddy?
The question was about the presence of the federal regulators.
Right. Exactly. I mean, were they at the Office of Pipeline Control, whoever? Was anybody ever there? I mean, from what I heard before, hardly anyone had seen anybody.
I have no reason to dispute their statements, because there is no way that anybody in one position can ascertain the full involvement of any government regulatory agency from where they stand. From where I stand, I have the view of a number of regulatory agency personnel out on the pipeline or in other facilities virtually all the time.
State and federal, or?
The BLM and the State Pipeline Coordinator's Office each have a number of staff people that are primarily assigned to the field. A lot of their work is in the field on the pipeline end, because a great majority of our field work that affects the stipulations of the grant of right-of-way is carried on there. By no means all, but a great deal of the work, and so, not surprisingly, a lot of their work is concentrated in that particular area. The DOT Office of Pipeline Safety person in Anchorage, Bruce Hansen, regularly goes to the field, regularly is in our office doing audits. I believe this year he has had either 2 or 3, and if it's not 3 right now, it will be, because there's another one scheduled very soon. Audits of both our records in town at our central office, as well as the required records that DOT requires as part of their enforcement of Part 195 in the field. And as a matter of fact, he files a report on those activities.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Biddy, you have anything to add to that?
I returned to Alyeska in 1988, and I've never seen a regulator in the field. When I was at the Valdez terminal, we were told a couple of times that there were regulators that were supposed to be on site, and that we were supposed to stay away from them, and if there were any questions directed to us, we were directed to the applicable Alyeska representative. Were
you in a position from 1988 on to be there when regulators should have been there?
In 1988, I was involved with relaying of some pipe at pump stations 2 and 3, and we were doing DOT hydro test. So I thought that there should have been a regulator there, but I don't know. I never saw one. And then the activities that were occurring at the terminal, like the hydro test out on the berths, on the loading arms, and the other piping like that, it was my understanding that the Coast Guard was supposed to be there, but we never saw them there either.
Mr. Pritchard, do you want to add anything at all to this? I'm very interested in this because either we have these people doing their job or we haven't. We don't have them doing their job. And I just wanted to make sure that this was not being wasted taxpayers' dollars.
Well, I defer to these gentlemen on their experiences. They've had more experience with it than me. The one thing that I will say about regulators is this, that I believe it would be a mistake for us to rely on regulators to comply with regulations. I think it's our responsibility to do that ourselves, that we cannot just get complacent and rely on other people to make sure we're complying ourselves, and we don't intend to do that. That's not a comment on whether the regulators are efficient or not. I just believe it would be irresponsible to entirely rely on other people to do that.
In other words, rely on people such as the four gentlemen that were here prior on the panel that made recommendations that were apparently not followed through on.
We ought to be finding those things ourselves.
I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time is expired.
It's false economy.
It end up costing you more in the long run.
That's right. It is much cheaper to do something right the first time than it is to repair it when you discover it's defective.
Will you recommend to the owners that Booz Allen's study be expanded to include the relationship between Alyeska and his owners?
No, I won't. As I replied to Congressman Brown, I just do not believe that would be helpful.
One final couple questions. You were here probably when we had the previous panel, and we were talking about the regulators, state and federal. You heard the answers that we got from these individuals, and most of them had, I think all of them had been with the company better than a year and a half, and virtually had not seen state or federal regulators. Would you agree to this? Or Mr. Howitt or Mr. Biddy? Anyone? Mr. Biddy?
The question was about the presence of the federal regulators?
Right. Exactly. I mean, were they at the Office of Pipeline Control, whoever? Was anybody ever there? I mean, from what I heard before, hardly anyone had seen anybody.
I have no reason to dispute their statements, because there is no way that anybody in one position can ascertain the full involvement of any government regulatory agency from where they stand. From where I stand, I have the view of a number of regulatory agency personnel out on the pipeline or in other facilities virtually all the time.
State and federal, or?
The BLM and the State Pipeline Coordinator's Office each have a number of staff people that are primarily assigned to the field. A lot of their work is in the field on the pipeline end, because a great majority of our field work that affects the stipulations of the grant of right-of-way is carried on there. By no means all, but a great deal of the work, and so, not surprisingly, a lot of their work is concentrated in that particular area. The DOT Office of Pipeline Safety person in Anchorage, Bruce Hansen, regularly goes to the field, regularly is in our office doing audits. I believe this year he has had either 2 or 3, and if it's not 3 right now, it will be, because there's another one scheduled very soon. Audits of both our records in town at our central office, as well as the required records that DOT requires as part of their enforcement of Part 195 in the field. And as a matter of fact, he files a report on those activities.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Biddy, you have anything to add to that?
I returned to Alyeska in 1988, and I've never seen a regulator in the field. When I was at the Valdez terminal, we were told a couple of times that there were regulators that were supposed to be on site, and that we were supposed to stay away from them, and if there were any questions directed to us, we would direct it to the applicable Alyeska representative. Were
you in a position from 1988 on to be there when regulators should have been there?
In 1988, I was involved with relaying of some pipe at pump stations 2 and 3, and we were doing DOT hydro test. So I thought that there should have been a regulator there, but I don't know. I never saw one. And then the activities that were occurring at the terminal, like the hydro test out on the berths, on the loading arms, and the other piping like that. It was my understanding that the Coast Guard was supposed to be there, but we never saw them there either.
Mr. Pritchard, you want to add anything at all to this? I'm very interested in this because either we have these people doing their job or we haven't. We don't have them doing their job. And I always wanted to make sure that this was not being wasted taxpayers' dollars.
Well, I defer to these gentlemen on their experiences. They've had more experience with it than me. The one thing that I will say about regulators is this, that I believe it would be a mistake for us to rely on regulators to comply with regulations. I think it's our responsibility to do that ourselves, that we cannot just get complacent and rely on other people to make sure we're complying ourselves, and we don't intend to do that. That's not a comment on whether the regulators are efficient or not. I just believe it would be irresponsible to entirely rely on other people to do that.
In other words, rely on people such as the 4 gentlemen that were here prior on the panel that made recommendations that were apparently not followed through on.
We ought to be finding those things ourselves.
I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pritchard, you indicated that you are currently at work, and the number in your statement indicates it on a number of different changes at Alyeska. One of them is that you're working on a backlog of some 130 code violations. What's going on there?
Something like 130 in the most critical power distribution center that we're working on. That the ones that are easy to fix are being fixed right now, and that's where the number was 30 as of last Friday. And I think there's something like another 30 that will be done promptly. The piece or the items beyond that need some engineering and in some cases ordering of parts, so they may take up to a year to do if it takes us a year to get hold of the parts. But the program is moving forward.
Those code violations came to light how?
Those code violations came to light through the subcommittee, and I'm not sure how it got to the subcommittee. I just don't recall.
So when those code violations came to light through the subcommittee, then you set about having them addressed by the personnel.
Yeah.
What was happening before the subcommittee brought those to light?
I don't know. I think some work had started. I mean, this is not something that we started last week. This had been started before that the work was ongoing.
Mr. Howard, how did those code violations come forward?
The specific code violations you're referring to in PDC 14, I don't know exactly how those came forward, but I believe that Mr. Pritchard's description of those specific ones is correct, that they came forward through the committee. What I do know also is that Alyeska has both discovered code violations due to discrepancy reports and nonconformance reports which have been filed by inspectors, and those are either in the process of being closed or are about to be worked on. That is the normal process in which we discover code violations. And so I would anticipate that in the future that's how we also will too.
Are any of these code violations that were found by the witnesses this morning or other inspectors, doesn't have to be the witnesses this morning, that were then downgraded to the punch list and were not found and were not allowed to be filed as a discrepancy of, what do you call them, discrepancy violation?
Based on the description that Mr. Turkana gave, I anticipate that some of these were discovered originally by him. I don't have personal knowledge of that, but based on his description, if that's correct, that would probably be the case.
Have you looked at that, Mr. Pritchard?
I'm sorry?
Have you looked to see whether or not any of these code violations were code violations that were discovered by either the witnesses this morning or other inspectors, and when brought to the attention of their supervisors, were downgraded to the punch list or were not addressed at that time?
No, I have not.
Do you have a process in place to determine that?
No, my interest is just in fixing the violations.
Well, if that's the case, then you got very, very serious problems. Because you also ought to have an interest to find out whether or not your supervisors were downgrading safety violations that you're now fixing and could have been brought to the attention of this company a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. And people have staked their reputations on that. And you have suggested here, and others have suggested, that somehow they, in fact, were the wrongdoers. They're the ones that lost their jobs or lost their pay or were transferred. And yet the suggestion may be that if you match up the documents, you may find out that you, in fact, have supervisors who are not serving this company terribly well. But they, as I understand it, they all still have their jobs. You're not worried about that?
Yes, you'll recall that I said earlier in response to a question that I'm very concerned about
I'm recalling just a second ago when you responded to my question of whether if you'd looked at that.
No, I have not looked at that specifically, but I am very interested.
Don't you want to know what you're inheriting here? You've been brought in as a troubleshooter to run a corporate nightmare in terms of the public interest, either environmentally, safety, or otherwise. You're not interested in what your personnel is? You're not interested in who you can trust, who's lying to you or lying to the public or lying to the inspectors or lying to their supervisors?
Of course I am.
Well, then what are you doing?
What I'm doing is I want to look at this systematically.
You're brought here because this incident blew up in your face, as Mr. Hermiller was brought here because the Valdez blew up in somebody else's face.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
You don't want to run an audit of this operation to find out who, in fact, was being candid with the company in terms of their problems and who, in fact, was feathering their own nest?
Yes,
you just said you have a big, huge company where you said the communications are deplorable, although when challenged on the communications earlier, you said they were quite good. But the point being this, how do you know who you're communicating with? Are you communicating with liars? Are you communicating with people who are misleading you? Are you communicating with people who use their positions of power to diminish the findings of others with respect to safety or environmental hazards? You don't know what your workforce looks like. Do you?
Yes, we have some.
You have some very good people there. You've said that about 50
times
since your seat
That's correct.
hit the seat.
And I believe that.
That may be the case, but do you know whether or not they were involved in a process of downgrading safety violations and reducing them to the punch list and not having them addressed and asking that discrepancy reports not be filed?
No, I don't know it that specifically.
Don't you think it's worth asking? You think it's important enough that when the committee found out, you're fixing them. Is this cosmetic? With all due respect to everybody on this committee, I do not think we have any electrical engineers or are familiar with the code. But we find a violation and you fix it.
That's right, and I've stated that my intention is to...
Well, but we're not... If that's the way, I mean, we're not the people that are supposed to be bringing violations. These violations, many of them, may in fact have been brought to your attention much earlier in the ordinary course of business. But then somebody decided that they weren't going to be acknowledged and dealt with in a straight fashion manner, to the extent that 4 or 5 people, maybe others, have decided that they put their careers at risk and their families in jeopardy. And that's just in the past?
Look, I take all this very seriously.
But I think you're looking at the wrong issues. But go ahead.
I take all this very seriously, and as I've stated, and I've said it sincerely, and I mean it sincerely, I want us to get where we can be confident that we will uncover these things ourselves, that we don't have to rely on this committee or regulators to turn these things up for us.
Well, it would seem to me then that one of the things you would want to know at the outset is whether or not you have employees that have been doctoring the evidence, either for their own benefit or for the benefit of somebody else, and perhaps in violation of the criminal codes of this country with respect to their obligations to the federal government. And you'd try to find that out. Because if somebody was, you may want to send a message to that group of individuals that that's not tolerated. But if this is now just a clean ledger because you come along as the new person that has no experience, knowledge, or history of the Alyeska operation, and we've seen this movie now 3 times, but you now come along so we can erase the history and move on, what is the message that's being sent to people that may have been doctoring company books and documents? They're home free?
No, that's certainly not the message we intend to send.
Well, what are you going to do? We had a nice conversation. You told me things are going to be different. How are they going to be different?
As I said earlier, I told you about the steps I was taking. And I also said these problems are elusive, they're not very tangible, they're difficult to get your arms around, they deal with things like trust and management style.
Well, let me explain something to you. When you wanted to find out whether or not somebody was leaking your documents, you were wiretapping people, you were surveilling their homes and their place of business, you were following their families, you were invading their privacy, you were picking up their mail, and you were surveilling the activities of my committee. If you wanted to find out who was lying to you and doctoring the books, what are you prepared to do?
Those allegations that you just talked about have been made, and they're currently the subject of a lawsuit.
No. Not those particular allegations. Well, some of them are and some of them aren't. What are you prepared to do? Forget those allocations. That's what you inherit. What are you prepared to do to find out whether or not you got employees that are lying to the government, lying to the Congress, and lying to your company? That's what we want to know, because we've all been here before, as the chairman of this committee has pointed out. We got all of the statements in the record about how things are going to be different. You've had your private meetings with the chairman of this committee, myself, and others, how things are going to be different. What are you prepared to do? Simply wait for the Booz Allen report? You're the captain of the ship, Mr. Pritchard. You're not going to interview the crew? You're not going to find out what was going on?
Of course I've talked to the crew.
So you're
Or some of the
satisfied?
crew. I didn't say that.
Well, you got to come forth. Give me something. Give me something that tells me you have as much interest in going to the root of this problem, which goes to the integrity of the system you're charged to run, as you do in getting your documents back. I don't know that the documents ever harm the integrity of this system, but these violations might very well.
One of the people that was named this morning by the first panel is no longer with the company, and that's Mr. Carter.
Based upon a finding of what?
Based upon in looking into these allegations that were made.
What about the gentleman that threatened to break Mr. Bibby's arms?
Oh, you heard that. He still is with the company.
To take a pay cut?
No, he did not.
Just works in a different location.
That's correct.
What about all of the supervisors that are implicated in whether or not they were reducing safety violations or allegations of safety violations to improperly to the punch list, or not allowing the reports to be filed and or ignoring the reports?
I don't know all of these individuals personally.
Is there any process to go through that? Is there currently a process set up to go through that?
No, there is not.
Well, you know, it seems to me the systems failure you had at the Exxon Valdez, the difference here is you got the same systems failure, you just don't have any oil on the water yet. I differ greatly, obviously, with my colleague from Alaska, Mr. Young, who said, well, that was just the act of the captain of the ship. Except that your company was in here assuring this Congress and the people of Alaska just a short while before then that they could handle that exact situation. And when the moment came to perform, the system failed. Because the system was supposed to be constructed around the fact that someday a major tanker would have a major breach. And when it happened under the ideal conditions, the system failed. You've got a horrendous system failure here in terms of how you handle allegations of safety violations throughout this process. I assume that's what you're here to deal with. That's why the owners picked you. You're their representative.
Sorry, what was the question?
I want to know what you're going to do that's going to make it different. So far, I could use Mr. Hermiller's statement. That brought us this crisis.
All I can do is repeat again what I said before, that I have the owner's support in wanting to fix these problems which are now well documented. And it's going to take some time to do that.
But if these problems are well documented and you're fixing them, as you suggest with the code violations, then there's a generic problem that goes to the personnel operation and management of your company. Unless you can come forth and show me that what you're fixing now is news to you. But apparently they were submitted in documents and depositions that they were pre-existing. Your system didn't catch them.
And we will do better in the future.
But you're operating with the same people.
We are operating with many good people.
I'm sure you are. I've met many of them. The system still failed you. And it's failing us. Because we hold the franchise. Or we grant the franchise on this right-of-way. And these are not the assurances that were given to us at the time we made that decision. I think you better think about this. I mean, I cannot believe that these people have... Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Pritchard, after our staff went up to where you all are located, I understand a review of national electrical code violations at the Marine Terminal was initiated. How many violations of the National Electrical Code were discovered at that facility?
I believe it was approximately 1,000.
1,000. 1,000 code violations. How much is it going to cost to fix that problem?
The initial estimate that we've got is $10 million plus or minus. And in some cases, we don't know how much it's going to cost to fix them because we've got some engineering work to do and we've got to order some parts and so on.
Now, does this matter represent a deterioration of that facility, or have these problems existed all along?
I don't know. Some of the facilities have been in there since day one. Some of them have been added to and expanded, so I don't know precisely how long these violations have been that way. In some cases, the code has changed over the years.
Well, let me hold on there. It would seem to me to be of the most basic importance to know whether or not this facility is deteriorating or whether or not these code violations have just have existed all along. Is to say what the general condition of the facility is. I'm surprised you don't know that already, or at least don't have some type of a study underway to find that out.
Yeah, we have a study underway to find that out. I mean, I've been inside the facility and taken a look myself, and it doesn't look like it's deteriorating to me, although there are code violations there, and they will be fixed.
So they probably existed all along. Is that correct?
Some of them may have. I just don't know. As I said, the codes have changed. It's possible to put something in, and then the code changes. These codes are constantly being revised.
Well, Mr. Pritchard, aren't these the same electrical problems that these inspectors have been trying to point out for years?
So, some of them could be.
Well, you filed a lawsuit here to try to stop Mr. Hamill from receiving any more information that's been forwarded to him in the past, apparently by sources within the company, in order to bring to light these matters which were purposely hidden before. Is that correct?
No, it's not strictly correct. We did not file a lawsuit to stop Mr. Hamill receiving information. We filed a lawsuit to stop Mr. Hamill receiving documents.
Well, now, we've had testimony earlier today that your company's policy has specifically been to prevent not only the dissemination of any documents, but to prevent the creation of any documents, i.e. to create to prevent the creation of a paper trail, which might allow government inspectors to understand where the problems are. You heard that testimony, didn't you?
I didn't hear it expressed as policy.
Well,
In fact, on the contrary, our policy says that we need to maintain a strict audit paper trail.
Well, clearly that policy wasn't being followed if, as you said, you believe the testimony of the 4 individuals who were here earlier. Would you agree?
If that is the case, yes.
Well, you said you believe their testimony. That's what they testified to, so I think we would all have to agree that was the situation at Alyeska.
I said I had no reason to believe they were not telling the truth, but sometimes there's more than one side to a story, or some information that they were unaware of. I just can't say one way or the other.
Well, has Alyeska been successful? I know you hired Wackenhut, at least your predecessor did. A big effort was made to find the identity of those who were leaking information, Mr. Hamill. Has Alyeska been successful in identifying the source of those leaks?
Not to my knowledge, and the source of the leaks is of no particular interest to me.
It's of no interest to you?
It's of no particular interest to me.
Mr. Howitt, do you know if the source of those leaks was identified?
No, I do not.
You don't know at all? You haven't heard any discussion of that matter?
I've heard conjecture, but no discussion.
Well, who in the company would know? Wackenhut's getting paid, so obviously somebody's going to want to know whether they did their job or not. So who would know the answer to that?
Sir, I don't know who would know the answer to that.
Who's paying Wackenhut? Who's authorizing the checks to Wackenhut?
The Wackenhut investigation is over.
How long has it been over?
I don't know. It was concluded before I arrived on the scene.
Okay. Mr. Howitt, though, you've been there a long time, haven't you?
Yes, I've been with Alyeska for 18 years.
Did Wackenhut submit a report? Or did they submit regular reports?
I don't know. As I testified before, I know nothing about the Wackenhut investigation. I was not involved in it whatsoever.
All right, we'd like to ask, if you would, to find the answer to those questions with regard to Wackenhut, i.e., who was Wackenhut reporting to? If regular reports were made with regard to the source of those leaks, or any reports of any kind were made with regard to the source of those leaks, attempting to or in fact identifying the sources of those leaks, and the names of those who were alleged to have leaked this information. We'd like that information provided to the committee.
So noted.
Staff advises me to add to that we would like to have you include copies of those reports in your answer to this question, your written answer to this question. I would just conclude by, we have any further members present? We have a vote pending in about 5 minutes, so I will recess the committee for 15 minutes until the next. Until Sheridan. Right. Approximately 10 minutes, we'll resume again. I will thank you for being here. I think it's important for us to express, if it's not been clear already, our great concern about the situation there, and some skepticism about some of the responses. It's very clear as well. I hope you can get it under control, Mr. Pritchard. The committee will be in recess for 10 minutes, and we will reconvene with the third panel.
Are we excused?
All witnesses are sworn. Do any of you object to testifying under oath? Very well. Do any of you desire to be advised by counsel? Very well. Gentlemen, then copies of the rules of the subcommittee, the committee, and the House are there at the witness table before you to inform you of your rights and the limits on the powers of the committee. Gentlemen, if you will please each rise and raise your right hand. Gentlemen, do you solemnly swear the testimony you will give the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Gentlemen, you may consider yourself then to be under oath. Without objection, your full statements will be inserted in the record. We will recognize each of you for such summary as you so choose. Commencing in such order, well, we'll start first, I guess, with Mr. Armstrong, then Mr. Tenley, Mr. Baca, and Mr. Sanderson. If those orders meet your approval, gentlemen, then we will go in that fashion. So if you would please proceed, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, my name is Bob Armstrong. I'm Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management at the Department of Interior. I am here because the Secretary and the Chief of Staff have recused themselves from this matter because of prior representation of one of the parties involved. Therefore, I will represent the Department in this matter now and in the future.
I assume, Mr. Armstrong, you have full authority then to speak on behalf of the Department.
That is correct.
And full decision-making authority.
I believe that to be the fact, yes, sir.
I'm sure you want to take the blame for what's happened before, too.
I beg your pardon?
I say I'm sure you want to take the blame for what's happened before, too.
I would recuse myself on that, from that.
You may consider yourself recognized. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In sum, you have a short statement before you that I have made. It says basically that upon being advised of this matter, I have asked the Director of the Bureau of Land Management, Jim Baca, to come forward with a plan, and he and his staff have done so. I support this plan fully. I stand ready to do anything else that the committee thinks would be appropriate for the department to do, but we have a great deal of concern about the way that this situation has developed and about the way that the department might have done better. And in light of this past history, we would pledge to you that we are willing to make the changes that are necessary so that you can have confidence in the way that we will operate in the future in the regulation of TAPs. I would leave the details to Mr. Baca and say basically that I support him fully and stand ready to cooperate in any way I can with the committee.
Mr. Baca.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate being here today. Although BLM is the lead federal agency in the Joint Pipeline Office, we must acknowledge to you today that full management authority has not been exercised in the past. However, I want you to know that there will be a major change in our pipeline management and that the BLM will exercise its authority to the fullest extent needed to do the job right. I have no doubt that the JPO and the BLM as lead agency have full management authority and that this authority amounts to regulation of the pipeline operations regardless of whether it is formally considered so. Recently, criticism has been leveled at the oversight of the pipeline in general and at specific problems such as alleged discrepancies in meter readings at the Valdez Terminal and at Prudhoe Bay. The Valdez Terminal is integral to the TAPs and will be comprehensively overseen by the Bureau of Land Management and the Joint Pipeline Office. We know that aging wires were another problem. They are weakening this impregnated mineral oil intended to lengthen the life of the wire. We know that if it's uncorrected, there is some danger of fire. Other emissions have also been reported that may be dangerous to human health. Mr. Chairman, like you, I am troubled by reports of problems with the supervision, management, and maintenance of the pipeline system. I am resolved to get these problems under control, and I have already taken steps in that direction, and I would like to lay these out for you. I guess the first thing I would like to say is that I came and attended the whole meeting today because I understand I am a new guy on the block, just like this other fellow from Alyeska, I suppose. But I intend to get very serious about this and pay a lot of attention to it. I want you to know that I have named a personal representative, Dr. Jeffrey Zabler, to track progress on our remedial actions and to keep me informed of the progress on those actions. Dr. Zabler also represents the Department of Interior and the President's task force that will audit TAP's operations and report its findings to Congress. Next, as of May 1st of this year, we initiated a new monitoring program that tracks 20 vital items in the operation of TAPs across jurisdictional lines. This will highlight any problems that may arise with the pipeline system. We are doubling the number of federal inspectors for the pipeline system by hiring 5 new staff members skilled in pipeline operations. Once these people are on board, we will be able to have twice as many inspectors in the field at any time. And I know that that sort of opens me up for a little criticism, since some of the witnesses have said they've never seen any in the field, but I can guarantee you that they will be in the field. These inspectors will constitute a special section dedicated solely to pipeline monitoring with no other collateral duties. Furthermore, if we find that more specialists are needed, we will hire them, and Alyeska, the pipeline operator, will assume all the cost. At my direction, BLM is making major changes in the management of the pipeline. We will exercise our authority over federal lands and lead the Joint Pipeline Office consistent with the 1973 Trans-Alaska Pipeline Authorization Act. If we cannot fully carry out the mandate of the JPO without additional staff, we will hire the appropriate people, and Alyeska will bear the cost. I will encourage the Presidential Task Force on TAPS to review management arrangements, and by the end of the year, I will give Congress and the task force legislative recommendations to clarify and strengthen our management. Finally, we at BLM are already conducting a thorough review to identify additional actions that may be desirable. This review process will be an ongoing program. In addition to our own review, we welcome input from any and all interested parties, whether suggestions for improvements or allegations from whistleblowers. We will be setting up a whistleblowers hotline. We will act promptly to implement appropriate recommendations that come out of the review findings. In fact, we have already prepared an action plan, and we have begun making those changes. I would like to get a handle on this matter. You have my guarantee that I will pay attention to it, and that the Bureau of Land Management will carry out its responsibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Bacher. Mr. Tinley?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to testify on behalf of the Department of Transportation concerning important issues arising out of your investigation of government oversight of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, or TAPS. The Department's Pipeline Safety Program, administered by the Office of Pipeline Safety, which I head, provides oversight of TAPS operations. Our actions are intended to assure Alyeska's compliance with the pipeline safety regulations. We conduct these responsibilities consistent with the agency's statutory authority and available resources, and commensurate with Alaska's environmental sensitivity and TAP status as the major transporter of domestically produced crude oil. We use a two-pronged approach for carrying out our responsibilities. We conduct, as part of our risk-based inspection plan, annual standard inspections of the entire system. In addition, in conjunction with the Joint Pipeline Office, we are leading an ongoing TAPS corrosion investigation. I have included with my submitted testimony an illustration delineating federal and state responsibility. OPS regulates transportation facilities on TAPS. These include the TAPS main line and its extension to the Valdez Marine Terminal up to the tanker loading arms. These also include certain tanks and piping along the main line that are used for pressure relief and for balancing main line throughput. OPS regulations emphasize the prevention of accidents and spills through application of design and construction standards, operational practices which maintain pipeline integrity, monitoring leak detection systems, and emergency response procedures that mitigate consequences. We place special emphasis on cathodic protection and corrosion monitoring of TAPS because of Alyeska's discovery of serious corrosion on the main line and in some tanks. As a member of the Joint Pipeline Office since 1990, we participated in the resolution of a broad spectrum of TAPS-related issues, but we apply our compliance authority only to those matters which are under our jurisdiction. The subcommittee has expressed concern about allegations of possible criminal wrongdoing concerning record-keeping, harassment of QA/QC inspectors, and investigations of private citizens. To date, the allegations have been more appropriately handled by agencies other than the Department of Transportation, such as the State of Alaska and the Department of Labor. Should any future instance involve OPS responsibilities, we can draw on the resources of the Inspector General of the Department for investigation. Although we conduct inspections of most pipelines within a 3 to 5 year cycle, we conduct annual inspections of TAPS and follow up on safety-related conditions reported by Alyeska. 99 such conditions have been reported since 1990. Instances of noncompliance, however, have not represented an imminent threat to pipeline integrity. OPS has pursued 4 enforcement cases against Alyeska, and I'll amend that to say 5. We issued another case this week. The most noteworthy of which involves an overpressure of the main line that occurred in August 1992. Alyeska has implemented measures to prevent a recurrence. Most recently, OPS is investigating for possible enforcement action the issue of weeping cables brought to our attention by committee staff. The oversight activities OPS performs in concert with the other Joint Pipeline Office agencies focus on corrosion because both the main line and tanks have experienced corrosion beyond that expected for a relatively new pipeline facility. Because TAPS corrosion is subject to oversight by more than one agency, the coordinated multi-agency investigative approach is essential. Directives to Alyeska are most effective when the agencies coordinate priorities and schedules. The Joint Pipeline Office Task Force operates under a work plan developed by the member agencies, which designate one or more lead agencies per work item. OPS is lead agency on work items addressing mainline cathodic protection, corrosion data analysis, anode connections, effectiveness of internal inspection devices or PIGs, corrosion repair procedures, internal corrosion monitoring, relief systems, tank corrosion, and the condition of the natural gas pipeline between pump stations 1 and 4. OPS uses the Joint Pipeline Office to coordinate response to congressional concerns and whistleblower complaints. The member agencies jointly assign follow-up activities to one another based on their relevant authorities. We are following up on all recommendations from the GAO report on TAPS oversight, which was issued in July 1991 concerning cathodic protection, detection of internal and external corrosion on the main line and at Valdez, testing of Alyeska's leak detection system, and assuring that government oversight is systematic, disciplined, and coordinated with central leadership. In addition to its ongoing investigation and investigative efforts, OPS is implementing regulations mandated by the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 that address response planning in areas of environmental importance. Additionally, there are 2 areas of research which we have planned for next year which would directly benefit our oversight of TAPS. One is evaluating the reliability and sensitivity of leak detection systems which operate as part of supervisory control and data acquisition systems, which is the real-time means by which pipeline operators control their pipelines. The other relates to examining techniques for electrical inspection of cathodically unprotected breakout tanks and designs for retrofitting cathodic protection systems. During fiscal year 1993, RSPA has been active in the establishment of a presidential task force to conduct an independent audit of the TAPS authorized under Title VIII of the Oil Pollution Act. We expect to provide whatever information is necessary for the task force to complete its assessment, and we'll look forward to any recommendations resulting from the completion of that effort. Like the other witnesses testifying today, the Department of Transportation is very concerned about the continued safe operation of TAPS. To this end, we will continue to view our oversight of TAPS as one of our most important responsibilities. Thank you very much.
Mr. Armstrong is new and Mr. Bacchus is new. Are you new?
I beg your pardon?
Have you been on the job for a while?
I've been on the job for about 3.5 years.
Excuse me. Okay. Mr. Sanderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By prior arrangement of the staff, I have agreed to submit my testimony for the record and forego any opening statement and make myself available to questions.
Thank you. The chair recognizes itself for 5 minutes. I'd like to ask each of you, since I think all of you have been here throughout the day today, your impression of the testimony that you heard both from the panel of the 4 inspectors, former inspectors, as well as from the people who were here a moment ago from Alyeska. Starting with Mr. Tinley.
Mr. Chairman, I did not hear the morning testimony, but I certainly know about the allegations of the whistleblowers, and I know the belief that they bring to those allegations. I did hear the testimony from Alyeska. Generally speaking, I would say this. I believe that there is a problem with respect to information in Alyeska within the internal operations of the company. I think prior to 1991, that was a very definite compliance issue for us. I think it's less of a compliance issue today, although I will say I'm concerned about some of the revelations where the company has not availed itself of some internal intelligence it could have had to act as a better pipeline operator. But with our focus on the corrosion work of Alyeska, I feel very good about the corrosion work that they're doing and the progress that we've made in preparing that pipeline for the rest of its existence.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong.
I was not here for the morning testimony. I would say that having listened to the questions and the answers that I heard this afternoon, that I would have substantially the same concerns that the members of the subcommittee have. I think that they have some internal work to do, and I'm very hopeful that maybe the third time is a charm and they can get to work and we can cooperate with them and get something done.
Mr. Baca?
Mr. Chairman, I was here this morning, and I guess I was struck more with that panel for their honesty and sincerity and courageousness for doing what they've had to do and going through what they've had to go through. I am new to Alyeska pipeline issues, as you know. After hearing this afternoon's testimony, I would have to say from somebody who's managed big organizations that they possibly don't have control of their organization. And when I say control, I mean a control in the fact that they have responsibilities to carry out as a part of this right-of-way that they have with the federal government, and they should get control of it quickly, and BLM will help them along the way.
Mr. Sanderson?
From an environmental perspective, the testimony both this morning and this afternoon concerns me greatly. We don't need another major problem that all of you have experienced. We don't need any of these issues. My conversations with my people in Alaska assure me that there is progress being made. I'm just not certain it's being made with the alacrity that you and the rest of us would like to have it made.
Okay. Mr. Baca, how would you characterize the oversight of the pipeline by your agency? And we'll grant that you are new to the agency. How would you characterize the oversight of the pipeline by your agency over the last several years?
Mr. Chairman, from the investigations that I have made, the oversight has not been good. And I don't know if I can just specifically blame BLM for that, but when you have these organizations such as the JPO, somebody has to be in charge. And it looked to me, although BLM and Interior is more or less charged with being in charge, they really didn't take that authority and use it. My aim is to make them use it. And so I don't think that we've done as well as we should have, and we will do better.
Have you developed an opinion about how bad the overall situation is at the present time?
Mr. Chairman, I really haven't developed that kind of opinion on just how bad it was, and I guess I'm looking ahead. I can be pretty tough administrator, and I can guarantee you that we are going to do our job, and if it means changing out some people over there, we'll change them out.
Would you blame Alyeska for not informing BLM, or would you blame BLM for not being aggressive in doing their job?
I think we could have been a lot more aggressive, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tinley, how would you characterize the oversight of the pipeline by your agency over the last several years?
I'd say it was woefully inadequate up till 1990, and I think the GAO revealed that in what I thought was one of the better GAO reports that I've dealt with in my career. In the wake of that report, with the resources that we had available, we placed one inspector in Alaska to do nothing but Alaska pipeline matters, including Alyeska and about 15 other pipeline operators. My opening comment to you reflects the fact that it was pretty miserable back in 1989, 1990, and that was equal parts Alyeska and equal parts Department of Transportation and other agencies. So I'm sort of looking at a continuum of improvement, and so my perspective of having been in the job 3.5 years is that we have made progress, but when I hear testimony that I hear today, it makes me scratch my head and wonder if there aren't still some more penetrating looks that we can take. So I'd say I think we're making progress, but when framed the way the questions have been framed today, that progress I know must seem to be very slight to you gentlemen.
Okay. My time's expired. Mr. Schaefer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You gentlemen probably were not aware, I don't remember who was here this morning on our first panel, but I was asking the questions about state and federal regulators and how often the witnesses saw them, and virtually all four of the gentlemen indicated that they very rarely saw a regulator of any kind, including state or federal. The question is, do regulators make any effort to move beyond Alyeska management and talk to people in the field to really know what's going on out there, or can you substantiate any of the testimony that they said this morning that the regulators just aren't on the job? And
I'll try that.
Mr. Baca or Mr.
I'll try that first. I was surprised to hear that. I know I've been to Valdez Terminal twice myself. I've been to pump station number 4. I've been to, I think, pump station number 8 as well, and I've been on other facilities. The inspector that we have up there does an annual inspection of the Alyeska pipeline. We break the system into 5 distinct parts. He sees all 5 of those parts every year on an annual basis. The fact that he has not seen the gentleman or the colleagues of the gentleman that testified this morning may be due in part to the fact that some of them are contract employees and we deal with the owner and the operator. But clearly when we go out into a field like we were at the Adigan Digs, for example, we're in the trench with the people who are doing the ultrasound readings. We're in the people with the people who are doing the backfilling. But again, it's one person and it's one time a year at 5 distinct facilities, and that means he may not come into contact with a lot of the field people you're describing.
I think Mr. Biddy also, who was an inspector of sorts, or is, agreed with this view, and he was certainly in line to be seeing regulators, at least from my understanding of it. However, Mr. Howitt, on the other hand, said He sees them all the time. So are we saying it's just because of the